This is another Hang Loose Recluse stolen production.
There was a very interesting opinion piece in the newspaper this morning about the police powers. Does it worry you that the WA police force have been given enhanced powers by the state government? Tom Penglis wrote this. He's the WA Justice Association co-founder, and he joins me live on 6PR this afternoon. G'day, Tom.
Hi, Ollie. Thanks for having me.
Well, I thought it was a really interesting, a thought-provoking piece that you have penned, and you've had a good look first and foremost here at these powers that have been introduced to keep people out of the entertainment precincts like Northbridge, Freo, Scarborough, Mandurah and Hillary's. What are you worried about with this, Tom?
Yeah, so the concern really is the lack of independent oversight, firstly. There's traditionally powers like these are subject to judicial review, so the courts are able to review them. Or alternatively, or in addition to that, police would usually have to apply for orders of this nature. These orders are very unique. It's the first time they've been introduced anywhere in Australia. And traditionally with punitive powers like this, the police have to apply to the courts so that there is an independent body monitoring it to make sure that the use of power is appropriate. In addition to that, it's just the breadth of the there's actually various things. There's the breadth of the power, so it can be applied to people who are acting in an offensive manner, which is very vague. That's not defined in the Act, so it's really up to the police to determine what's offensive and whether that offensive behaviour justifies imposing an order. And finally, really, is the Police Commissioner's power to create guidelines that determine the types of behaviour that justify a person being issued an exclusion order. Those guidelines are an internal document, and so Tony Booty is refusing to make those public, and has stated that they won't be subject to freedom of information legislation. So really, the public, we won't know what behaviours justify the police issuing these exclusion orders, or how the power to issue exclusion orders will be exercised by police. And there's just simply no good reason for that. We, as the public, have a right to know, and there's just no good reason for that.
No. So what's the secrecy around this, do you imagine, Tom? And why are we, as the public, kept in the dark if there's not going to be any independent oversight and you can't simply ask to review those guidelines or have some sort of an understanding as to why they're going to be put in place or what powers the police have? Why wouldn't we provide the general public with this level of information?
So it's a really good question. Why it hasn't been made public? I would expect a document like that. Like honestly, traditionally, I would expect that to actually that sort of detail to be set out in regulations or even in the Act itself. And by that I mean setting out the behaviours that justify the police imposing these sorts of orders or exercising these powers. Usually that's in the Act itself, or in the legislation or the regulations. So it's quite odd for it to be in guidelines created by the Police Commissioner. But the fact that those guidelines won't then be made public, I honestly couldn't tell you the reason.
We obviously have a separation of powers, and we would imagine that is very important. It's the foundations, Tom, of which we operate in a democracy. Do you think through the last 3 or so years as well, the enhanced powers that Police Commissioner Dawson and now Police Commissioner Blanche got used to, I suppose, when we had the G2G application in place, letting people in and out of the place, that has maybe strengthened the powers or the perceived powers of the police force?
Look, I think to an extent it has. I think, look, there was definitely a need during the pandemic for the police to have enhanced powers, but I think we should be very careful as a society now that we're out of the pandemic, or fingers crossed we're out of the pandemic.
Yeah,
I think
crossed.
We should be very careful about the nature of powers that we're giving to police, the role that the police have in the drafting of legislation that confers extraordinary powers on the police because they have been having a very intimate role in the drafting of this sort of legislation. And also, if we are to give, as you mentioned, the separation of powers, part of the separation of powers is having effective judicial oversight of the legislature and the executive, of which the police are part. Removing judicial oversight of the police is encroaching and really degrading the separation of powers in WA. Judicial oversight of police, that's why we have warrants for arrests or like for searching people's property. Yeah. That's why the police have to traditionally apply for warrants, because that separation of power and the oversight and checks and accountability that the judiciary provides is really important. So it's quite concerning that there's been several pieces of legislation that has eroded or completely removed judicial oversight of the police.
Yeah, that's something you picked up with the Firearms Act, the amendments there, the Firearms Act to introduce firearms prohibition orders, Tom.
Yeah, exactly. So with those came into effect, I think, in November of last year. And effectively, again, the police commissioner has the power to issue firearm prohibition orders. That effectively means it's a 10-year order, and it enables the police to really, in a nutshell, search people who are subject to those orders whenever they feel like it. There's no need for reasonable grounds to suspect that the person has a firearm or is breaching the order. They can really just go ahead and search the person really whenever they feel like it. When the commissioner wants to issue a firearm prohibition order, he doesn't need to apply to a court, and that is concerning due to the extreme nature of these orders. And the searches, when someone's subject to a firearm prohibition order, is being searched by the police don't have to get a warrant. They can search them whenever they feel like it. So again, it's just eroding that judicial oversight.
Should we be worried about this, Tom, and are we starting to live in a police state?
Look, I honestly think we should be worried about it. At the very least, I think everyone should be conscious of it and questioning if we are to give these sorts of powers to the police, which I think is a debate in its own right. But supposing we are to give these sorts of powers to the police, there has to be effective independent oversight, and that's just not what has been occurring. The legislation that's being passed is quite concerning in my view, and I think in my view, we are living in a bit of a police state, and it really, as I mentioned in the opinion piece, if laws are being enacted purely on the basis that they make it easier for the police to disrupt crime, then it's really open slather for any law to be passed. I've used the example of introducing the sorts of mass surveillance and social credit systems that you see in China that are, I don't know how you feel about those sorts of things.
Yeah, please not.
They scare me.
Yeah, they do. They certainly do. I think it's a thought-provoking, eye-opening piece, Tom, and I appreciate a few minutes of your time. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Ollie. You too, mate.
Tom Penglis there is the co-founder of the WA Justice Association. I'd love to hear what you make of what he's had to say today. He's concerned with the increased powers given to the police force by the state government. Would you agree with him? Do you feel like you're living sometimes in a police state? 133 882. Your feedback is next at 4 in Victoria, or the much higher deaths per capita as on the eastern seaboard. It's true that not everyone can be happy, but we're a long way from what the doom and gloom merchants are suggesting. Vince, I think to that point, our guest this afternoon indicated that the police powers, that's of course Tom Penglis from the WA Justice Association, the co-founder there, he's concerned with the increased powers given to the police by the state government. It must still have an oversight in place. And I think that is something that everybody should be concerned about and consider. Interview about the police powers, and Jim says the fact that none of us are entitled to even know what is allowed is of double concern.
This has been another Hang Loose Recluse stolen production.
We will be back.
For more. Thank you.